We'll discuss the power of focusing on what you do rather than what you say in the face of adversity. Please welcome to the stage founder of Hello Games, Sean Murray.
Hello. I'm Sean Murray. The folks at GDC asked me to talk about my journey as a game developer, and in particular about releasing games. So if this talk goes horribly wrong and my slides fail and all that kind of thing, it's just a clever analogy for releasing games that I have devised. But the truth is, I've never met a developer who finds releasing games easy. It always requires grit, and game development is hard. I've been lucky enough to work on a lot of very successful games, but I've always found emotionally the lowest point for me in development is releasing a game. It's not actually been until our most recent project, No Man's Sky, that I learned to actually become a lot more zen about it, to enjoy it, and to learn how to take a team through it. No Man's Sky was this crazy, innovative, ambitious game. It was a procedural universe, something nobody had done before. And when we would show it to people, we would be excited, they would get excited, and before we knew it, we were building a rocket ship on the way up, like blasting towards the sun. No Man's Sky, when it released, and also still 2 years later, has sold incredibly well. It's gone on to be one of the biggest selling new IPs of all time, which sounds really weird to say out loud. But our release was also one of the most intense and dramatic that I think the games industry has seen. This is something that's becoming increasingly common in the industry. A lot of games have faced this before us and after us, but unlike some of those, we weren't facing just one technical issue that we could fix, and we also were a tiny team. We were 6 people on average making No Man's Sky. We were just 15 when we launched, and we were a little family. And as a family, post-release, we faced some really difficult challenges. Everything that you can imagine from like the worst of the internet, we hit. Regular intervention from police and Scotland Yard and things like that. And I don't really want to talk about that side of things because I think that kind of toxicity and those toxic individuals already control too much of the narrative around games. Instead, I'd like to talk about how we move forward as a team. Because now we find ourselves mentioned as that benchmark for coming back. Doing a No Man's Sky is now a positive thing, right? 2 years out from launch, like I was saying, we're selling kind of numbers that I think most AAA games would be really proud of for their launch. But more importantly, we have a very positive, probably one of the most positive communities of any game that is launched. During those darker days, though, it would have been very easy to quit. It would have been almost expected or the norm. But 2 things forced me to get out of bed every morning. One was that we could see something that others couldn't. We could see hundreds of thousands of people playing the game every day, an average play time of 25 hours across millions of players. We knew that people were enjoying the game and wanted to enjoy it more. The second thing that really made me want to get out and fight is that the narrative around games that launch like this becomes about the team being maybe dishonest or lazy or something like that. I've never met a lazy developer. I've probably made bad mistakes in my time, but the fucking team at Hello Games are incredibly talented and so incredibly hardworking. And so I felt like their legacy deserved to be correct. So at first, the intensity of that feedback was overwhelming. But I decided you either had to hide or you had to face it. So I did something that I wouldn't recommend, but I decided to kind of drink from the fire hose, right? Every mail that you send to Hello Games goes directly to my phone and to my watch, right? We didn't block or mute people. If you talked about No Man's Sky, then I probably read it. Again, I wouldn't really recommend it, but it helped me gain a new perspective. And that perspective is that everything is just data. I sat down to categorize everything. I brought in people externally to do it, and we learned a lot from that. For instance, we learned that the most toxic commentary, about 80 to 90% of it, was coming from people who weren't really invested in the game. They were talking online about topics that are very common and very recognizable, and most games become a lightning rod for, like pre-orders or marketing or whatever. They aren't providing good data to you as a developer. That is where a lot of press and prominent voices focus, but we actually began to uncover the ground truth underneath that. The second most negative cohort of players was actually people who had played the game for about 100 hours in the first week. And their feedback was actually incredibly useful. Suddenly, from this overwhelming noise of millions of hot takes, we discovered some ground truth, some real incredibly clear signals, like 37% of people were stopping playing or frustrated in playing just because they didn't like the inventory system. And then suddenly you're like, that I can fix. I can sit down at my computer and I can fix that. Not just that, I agree with you. And now we know what we're doing. We're back making games for people who want to play them. Now, partly I did all of this gathering and data gathering for the team, to shield them. They knew they didn't have to go out and look at Twitter or whatever because it was being taken care of. They could look at raw spreadsheets of cold, hard data. We also created this Tumblr internally for the team, and anything where we found that we were making an impact and people were contacting us, we put that on the Tumblr. Nothing is more motivating for you who's going through a hard time than knowing that the work that you do is helping other people who are going through similar things. Meanwhile, we learned that press wasn't necessarily the best way for us to communicate with our players. When I grew up, the press kind of led my thinking. I read Edge or whatever to tell me how to feel about development and developers. In 2016 or 2018, we found for a variety of reasons, the press kind of operates downstream from the community. Because things are click-driven as to what stories you get served and things like that, we would find that glowing articles would disappear from the front page, but a rumor would surface from Reddit straight to the front page of every website in like a ridiculously quick amount of time. So if we wanted to talk to our players, we needed to do it directly, so we just shut down all communication with the press. And it was fun. I really enjoyed that. I've never wanted to talk to the press in the first place. I've never really got into games for that, and I think I'm terrible at it. So it felt like us being true to who we were as a company. Now, obviously, yes, listen to the community. It's very important for problems, not necessarily for solutions. We changed the game radically, and we changed it in line with our own vision, right? Someone at Valve, who was a fan of the game, said to me, what you do now is more important than what you say. And I can't tell you how many times I sat down to write a blog post to explain to people our side of the story or, kind of calm the storm or set things right. However, as a developer of a released game, I think that there's only one thing that's credible, and that's your actions. We decided to talk to the community through patch notes alone. So if we wanted to say something to our players, we had to put something in a build, we had to ship that build, and then we had to tell people about it. And there's something really pure and simple about that, and it informs the way we develop. It will inform the way we develop going forward. It's what we got into games to do. It allowed me to do something that I've always done in difficult times, whether it was crappy bosses that I've dealt with before or crappy situations at school growing up. I got my head down, I sat in front of a computer, and I made games, which is what I enjoy. I think There's this thing I've said to the team a few times, and it's something I've heard elsewhere, which is find your metric for success and optimize for that. And I love this. I'm a programmer, so we're saying words like metric and optimization, and that is right up my street, right? It speaks my language. It sounds cold and clinical, but I find a lot of meaning in it. Perhaps you want critical success. Perhaps you want the highest number of concurrencies. Whatever it is, find your metric. And every day as a team, you are faced with hundreds of decisions. And everything becomes so much simpler when you relate that back to your metric and make decisions optimized for that. But remember that comparison can be the thief of joy. When you release a game, it is so easy to fixate on how another game is achieving your metric better than you are, or whatever. It doesn't matter. Focus on you and your game. Now, everyone on the team has their own metric. I said to the team, this is something that we should do, and they kind of joked that I've been reading too many self-help books or something like that, but actually it's been really helpful for us. For me, it became about enjoying my work. And how I enjoy my work is seeing other people enjoying it. So that actually led me to this question of, like, why do I make games? Which is something I just hadn't really thought about before. But I had the opportunity and a lot of a situation that meant that maybe I didn't want to do that going forward. And I'm, like I said, a programmer, so I only understand human emotions in one way. And that's through the use of numbers and graphs. So just like any normal person, I started plotting my contentment on a month-by-month basis. Right? We've all done that. So for today, I actually asked a bunch of other friends who are developers to do the same, right? To draw out their journey as a game developer, right? And we all largely overlapped, right? Concept is fun, it's amazing. And it's followed by a more difficult pre-production, where you start thinking about, okay, was that concept such a good idea? And then you kind of climb out of that just in time for production, when you realize that everything that you did in pre-production was a terrible idea. And things are way tougher, and then you just think, oh, just focus. We'll get this game out, and when this game out is, it'll be amazing, and won't that be an incredible moment? And actually, for the reality is, it's kind of taboo, but for the majority of developers, it's a real low point. It's kind of an anticlimax. And what I've learned is that every part of game development is harder than the last. And I have this question of, like, why do we do it? And I've thought about this a lot over the last few years, right? And studies, like, consistently show this graph of basic human happiness. It starts out like you expect. Childhood is, fun and exciting, obviously, and then you become a teenager. Things are a little bit harder, and then you climb out of that in your 20s, and you learn to kind of find your feet, and then you have a choice. If you choose to go forward and have kids, statistically, your average happiness decreases quite a lot, right? During those toddler years, then those toddlers become teenagers, and now you've got the double whammy. They're going through their low point in the graph, and you're going through your low point in the graph, right? And then the final insult is that they move out, and you're the saddest you could be, right? So that's my talk. Making games is terrible. Don't have kids. Eric, thank you for coming. No, I do have some experience here, right? I embarked on this crazy, stupid project, right? The most ambitious game we could dream up with this tiny team. But I also helped bring 3 children into the world at the same time during those 5 years of development. And I discovered that there's a secret that those studies on happiness and my little graph doesn't show, right? Something amazing happens when you zoom in on that graph. We tend to measure happiness year by year, month to month. But actually, when you embark on something like this, as an indie dev, as a parent, or whatever, you tend to find that day to day, your happiness is changing wildly. I've come to realize that what you do in that situation is you're trading boring old average happiness for moments of transcendental joy, brief glimpses of what this thing you're making could become. And as a developer, over the last few years, I've learned to take a step back and actually try to enjoy that journey as a whole. For me, transcendental joy beats average happiness, even if it's just that you get those glimpses of it. And while we're here and we're comparing, having kids to making a game, because they're pretty much the same thing, then it suddenly makes sense to me why I would feel so kind of rudderless once my game comes out. It's my empty nest, right? My game's out there doing its own thing, occasionally calling me, right? And for me, over the last few years, I've learned to love tending my garden. No Man's Sky, for me, became the perfect outlet, right? There's this huge universe filled with players and somewhere where anything could exist. And if we look at the biggest games in the world right now, Warframe, Rainbow Six Siege, Fortnite, they all kind of had this slightly rocky or lukewarm launch. Innovation is in such short supply in the industry. And we need it so badly. We need to encourage it. We need to foster it. We need to ask people to shoot for the moon. And if they fail on their first attempt, we need to be there to support them. We focus far too much as an industry on week one sales and so little on long-term impact. We're all making games in the most polarized and intense moment in gaming. And it can be scary. But there's a simplicity I've found in releasing No Man's Sky. We've started something new now, and I'm loving it. I'm in that high part of the grasp, right? But I know that games and making games is never easy. So if we're going to do it, then let's not do it for anything that doesn't make an impact, that can't really change things or push the boundaries. Let's make sure it's insanely ambitious. And let's make sure that we savor the journey every single step of the way. Thank you.